Good afternoon, good morning to the second day. So this talk from me and Andreas, we will try to guide you through the work that was done over last, I think, 2 years to get the Samba running in environments with so-called FIPS mode. And we would like to discuss certain things about how really live in past the weak crypto and how we can go forward with more stronger things in Samba. So the first thing is why FIPS. The short answer is that there's plenty of customers for many companies that actually require to operate in environments that regulatory compliance to FIPS set of standards is required. And FIPS is a federal set of instructions and standards for processing information in the United States. In particular, the important part is the set of standards related to cryptography, which are maintained by the NIST Institute in US, but also many of the international standards, they actually rely or refer in their definitions to encryption defined in FIPS set of standards. There are many FIPS standards. So things like the PCI DSS and common criteria and many other standards, they really just refer to certain FIPS substandards to say how you have to configure your banking systems and e-commerce and so on. So it's not just the governmental organizations, but in US, governmental organizations do not have anymore a freedom to say that we cannot run in FIPS mode since 2014, I think. So it's pretty big requirement in certain areas. But the compliance with FIPS is always a blend. First, there is a certification process, which is really called validation. So FIPS validation is something that you would do for a cryptography module that implements certain cryptography primitives, and you validate that it operates as required. And then it's always a combination of things like that your software is actually using only the algorithms that within the validated FIPS crypto module. Then that your operational environment actually corresponds to what's defined in FIPS, and your business processes do not require things that beyond FIPS. And it's always interpreted by the organization or a specific person that does the audit of your environment. So it's not easy to say that you have FIPS mode switched on your server and you're great. It's always a blend of certain things together, and some of them are not technical or not technical anymore. And from Samba perspective, we tend to use the cryptography primitives that provided by the operating system we run on. But we also have certain behaviorals that define it by the protocol specifications that we try to implement. And we just need to be able to at least start in this FIPS environment, even if certain features would be cut short. And during this work that was done, we even weren't sure what is the feature set that we can actually work with, what would be cut off and what would still stay there. So this was really an open path. So what is the FIPS mode? It's so-called FIPS mode is really that you start your kernel, your operating system, with the mode that says only cryptography primitives that are approved by a certain FIPS standard. Typically, it's FIPS 140-2, and since 2 years now, 140-3 is available. Only those algorithms that describe it in these documents are available, and nothing else. And the FIPS certified crypto libraries, or the library versions that claiming that they're able to work in FIPS mode, they must disable non-approved crypto algorithms and actually must abort execution of the applications. There are always details on what really happens there, but that's kind of a gist of it. If we look into one of the specifications we rely on in Active Directory work, interoperability, it's MS Kyle specification that talks how Active Directory compatible systems should operate. So the encryption types that defined in this specification, they actually include a lot of different encryption types. The two of those at the top, the AS based, they fit into the FIPS requirements, but the 4 at the bottom, they cannot be used in FIPS mode. So we really cannot use RC4, and that presents quite a problem to the set of protocols that Samba implements, because RC4 is at the core of many protocols, many functional calls that are being done by Active Directory and by Samba. So, for example, of course, the specifications talk about that you should try to use better providers and better kind of extensions that encourage using a better security. But in RPC, for example, if you specify SPNIGA, that would allow to downgrade to NTLM formally. Of course, the server may deny it, but it needs to have a logic to deny it. And it may appear that the client and server don't have any common subset of the algorithms supported if the server runs in FIPS mode, and technically client should also run in the FIPS mode, but it might not be there. And we cannot really fall back to these unsupported things to establish sessions. But this RC4 is everywhere. So even if you disable NTLM, what happens is that there are plenty of protocols that actually use internally RC4 for certain things. For example, the when you create trust, you have to pass credentials of the trusted domain object towards the domain controller that will be trusting you. And setting up requires to encrypt these credentials with RC4 cipher, wrap them. Of course, you can require certain things to happen so that there will be a channel that would be using better cryptography, better encryption between the domain controller and domain controller. But at the same time, even if that is done, the domain member and domain member communication in the same domain requires use of the RC4H MAC to calculate the session key for AES. So it's like you still have to use the ciphers, even hashes that technically not allow it in FIPS mode. And the thing is, you actually not forced to not using it all the time. You can claim that, for example, RC4 can be equivalent to a plain text, which is it really is. If you otherwise encrypt the channel with the required and strong encryption methods, then you can treat the content encrypted with RC4 as just a plain text within that and strongly encrypted session channel. But you have to guarantee that the channel, the outer channel, is the right one. And using these kind of things would cover both of the examples I showed on the previous slide, like create trusted domain X2 or server authenticate 3. But we need to ensure that there is no fallback happening at all, anywhere. And we use the right approved crypto to create the session keys. And there are some places where we cannot do that. There are some situations that it's not possible to achieve this. So we in some cases, we simply need to have new versions of these calls to not use the RC4. But to a certain degree, we can leverage the this plain text within an encrypted channel approach. And so this all started with the idea, with two ideas. One of them is that we really need to have a control over how we use crypto in Samba. And one of these is to get rid of the internal implementations of as many algorithms as possible. The reason for that is that in FIPS mode, you only can use the if you really want to certify your environment as a FIPS environment, you only can use the crypto implementations that FIPS validated. So you can, as an application, you can rely, for example, on OpenSSL FIPS or GNU-TLS FIPS implementation that was validated by a certain vendor, and that vendor provides you the validated version. But you cannot use the same implementation inside your application because that's formally not validated. So that started in 2018 with the rewrite to use the GNU-TLS as the primary source of crypto for Samba. Andreas, can you start, maybe give a bit more overview of this?
Yes, so we decided to use GNU-TLS because it was already in use by the Samba project. Also, we have a really good relationship with the GNU-TLS people, and we were able to open bug reports and request features for Samba, for example, to make encryption faster, so to use to implement functions where we don't have to copy data around and make the encryption and decryption of the SMB encryption much faster. And that was implemented for us pretty quickly so that we were able to use them, and all the main distributions have up-to-date GNU-TLS in the meantime, so we make use of that. Yes, so it took quite a while to actually finished this about a year to migrate everything to GNU-TLS, get rid of all the, or at least try to get rid of most of the implementations we have in Samba. This also required new support for new ciphers and hashes in NetL, which is the low-level library used by GNU-TLS and also GNU-TLS, as Windows or Microsoft is using some flavors of a cipher or combinations which were not implemented there yet, or which are not widely used, for example, AES-CFP8. So that was implemented first and made available for us. And in the meantime, yeah, we can rely on that and use it. In total, we had around 380 commits till we were able to fully use the GNU-TLS library for encryption. And yeah, that made encryption probably around 10 times faster or even more, just by using GNU-TLS, because it is it has assembly implementations of the ciphers and can use of CPU features for encryption and decryption. So this made encryption or encrypted connections, SMB connections, much faster in Samba.
Yes, thank you. So it not only helped with the speed of Samba operations, but it also allowed to actually run in FIPS mode. So when all these changes finally landed in 4.12, we technically could run in FIPS mode, but there were few things there. So the first, the clients, they were still seeing NTLM advertised. That was fixed in 4.13 now. And if you don't have NTLM, your client code was kind of failing unless you explicitly specified Kerberos. And now you don't need to. So the Kerberos is picked up, and if you provided credentials like username and password, then we try to acquire ticket, in initial target ticket for you, and then authenticate with Kerberos against the remote server. But it still was given, and I guess will continue giving some of the strange errors, and if we reach the code paths that still use something not really FIPS compatible thing. On the other hand, we still needed to do something wider. So one of the things is that FreeIPA uses a number of Samba components and in particular Samba Python bindings to actually establish trust to Active Directory. And as I said, we have this problem with LSA calls that we have to ensure that the session used for communicating with the other domain controller, it's the secure session, and then we can use the RC4 internally. But at the same time, if both FreeIPA and Samba are running in FIPS mode, then the RC4 is not available through the crypto libraries, and we really should avoid duplicating that code. So there is a code in Samba that actually implements the RC4, and we were thinking that, okay, we shouldn't expose the code itself even through Python bindings so that there would be somebody trying to use it. Instead, we exposed, Andreas and Isaac wrote a Python API that wraps all this around. called the Create Trusted Domain Relax, which accepts the raw trust domain credentials, so really the password buffers that used for the TDO definition, and it internally switches back and forth the FIPS mode for the libraries to operate on RC4, and then ensures that we actually have AES session key, so that our session is encrypted with the right crypto algorithm, and then use that to wrap the processing and communicate to the external domain controller that we want to establish the trust. And this is where I think this was late January this year that we got this working finally, and to the point that if you boot RHEL 8 with these fixes into the FIPS mode, you actually can establish trust to Active Directory fully in FIPS mode, and it simply works, except a couple of things. So one of them is that establishing trust with the shared secret is not possible, because you cannot anymore use NTLM to authenticate to the remote server, and you need to start the validation process so that on the remote side, on the Windows side, Active Directory will mark your part of the trust as working. So it's kind of a chicken and egg, because you're using Kerberos, but in the Kerberos, in the DC, DC doesn't know that this particular realm is trusted and cannot use it. So you have to use the credentials from the trusting domain to establish trust. It's something we still need to figure out if there's a possible solution to that. And the other part was that we had to change all the codes that actually authenticates internally to use the Kerberos.
So
and
also an important aspect is that if you create an SMB and an SMB connection which is encrypted, and you handle out a session key, then it's possible that you afterwards downgrade to a plain text connection or to a signed connection. So we need to make sure that for this LSA named pipe, when we are calling RC4, that you are not able to do that. And so that the server aborts the connection if you try to downgrade to a non-encrypted connection.
Yeah. So in reality, if you get the Samba running in FIPS mode, it's currently only possible with the Kerberos. So you have to have Active Directory domain controller, or something that represents Active Directory, with the AES encryption types, because that's the only two types that we actually can use in SMB protocol in the FIPS mode. And the other catch here is that if you want to be really FIPS compliant, the Kerberos tickets have to be obtained with the use of pre-authentication methods approved by your FIPS auditor. The catch here is that in general, FIPS does not have Kerberos on the list of allowed protocols and methods. For some of the pre-authentication methods, it's possible to get this allowed. For example, if you do smart card authentication. And this is one thing of ongoing development with NIST, so that next version of FIPS standards would include Kerberos and specific pre-authentication methods that allow it to be used. And again, if you obtain a ticket using the methods like smart cards and you issue EAS-based Kerberos tickets, then it's possible to use that. So one part of it was that all the clients, all the code needs to default to use Kerberos. And in 4.15, we will have, it's already in Git master, the client use Kerberos option that can be set to a particular behavior. And actually, in FIPS mode, we set it to required automatically. But you have to update everything. And this is the part of the work to update this is what Andreas was explaining yesterday at his other talk. And I think altogether, including these changes for the GNU TLS integration and all the others, it's more than 600 different commits to support the FIPS mode. So it's quite huge effort with back and forth in multiple areas. Andreas, do you have anything to add here?
No, but with 650 commits, we are not done yet. I'm sure there will be much more.
Yeah. And one of the bigger problems here is that you need to start actually testing it. And you find out this works, this doesn't work. And there are so many different use cases and so on that might not be working. So in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8.4 documentation, this release was already announced, and the actual code should be available later this month. We tried to put certain guidelines there. So if you're a member in the Active Directory or in FreeIPA environment, then Kerberos authentication with AES ciphers will work automatically in FIPS mode. If you're a file server on Active Directory domain member, that will work again with Kerberos to authenticate. What will not work is a much bigger list. So for all stuff that uses RC4 directly, like NTLM, will not work. The SMB1 will not work. The standalone file server will not work because there is no password authentication. You have to be part of a certain domain. At the same time, that domain has to be a really Active Directory, because that's what includes Kerberos. So NT4 style domain controllers cannot be used for that, except the way where FreeIPA uses internally Samba to kind of represent hybrid Active Directory as a part of the really running internally NT style domain, but complementing it with KDC and LDAP and so on. And the NT style domain members, they do not really have Kerberos by definition. You only can do the Kerberos based thing. So it really blends the what does it mean to run it? It's probably hybrid rather than the NT4 style. Not NT4 style anymore. And the final thing that we found out that we didn't really test running Samba as a print server in the FIPS mode. Technically, this should work for Kerberos authentication, but not for anything else, obviously. So the question is really, how to really work, how to complement and replace NTLM scenarios so that you can support non-enrolled clients, you can support the standalone servers and so on. And the answer is not really clear. It's a matter of discussing and maybe improving specifications and so on. So one thing is that we obviously need a better authentication method as a replacement for NTLM. We see that authentication in Active Directory allows to use like four different approaches, right? So NTLM directly, Kerberos, PKU2U, and through SPNIGO, you can use negoX extension to create custom authentication protocol. And we don't have really support for PKU2U in Samba. I think Heimdall has support for this one, but doesn't really see any practical use of it in at least open source implementations. MIT doesn't have support for PKU2U either. And recently, MIT, like last year, gained support for negoX extension. And unlike, there's always a confusion what negoX is. It's really a container that can contain any authentication method that's supported by the client and the server. They can advertise it. And while it's still implemented with the help of Kerberos libraries, at least in the open source world, it doesn't require to have, in all situations, the Kerberos infrastructure. So you don't need to have Kerberos KDC to have a negoX authentication module or plugin to, let's say, MIT or Heimdall Kerberos library. And this gives us a chance to have an implementation of negoX-based plugin that supports better crypto. So for what could be there, it's the question of deciding, trying, and proposing and standardizing. So, for example, we started looking into what could be there and thought that some form of password authenticated key exchange, PAKE, can be used there. For example, there is a specification almost ready to be an RFC for SPAKE, already implemented in MIT Kerberos, already used in FreeIPA and other places that is much better than the other pre-authentication mechanisms in Kerberos that uses this password authenticated key exchange. And it could be extended to provide the negoX module without actually requiring a Kerberos infrastructure on this one. And technically, we could try to improve on it and use it. And then if we would have such negoX module for Windows, if it's installed, then the Windows clients will automatically be able to interoperate with Samba that uses the same negoX module and work in FIPS mode or work in the mode where you disable NTLM otherwise. That's, I think, all in our presentation. So are there any questions?
Andreas entered one of mine in the chat. I guess I have a question. How popular do you find that FIPS compliance is? Is it a must-have everywhere you look, or is it sort of an emerging requirement?
It's huge in the governmental
Absolutely. You can't install it if it's not FIPS compliant, right? But,
yeah, so starting
beyond
with
that,
2014, they cannot even delay FIPS compliance. They must have it.
yeah.
We also see at Red Hat, we see regularly banks asking for FIPS environment compatibility, because they have all their own internal requirements for that. And those requirements mostly driven by the industrial specs like PCI DSS certifications, because
So
they simply rely on FIPS definitions for the crypto.
yeah, they say check this box, right? Do you think it's going to be an impediment to Samba deployment soon, or not so soon, or what if it's not easy
So
to configure?
what we are also seeing that is that more and more Linux distributions, including Red Hat, are turning off certain old ciphers which are known to be broken, including
Right.
RC4, at least by default for TLS and also Kerberos. As Samba is using GNU TLS and not really the TLS part, this means RC4 is still available by default if you are not in FIPS mode. But maybe this will come at one point that RC4 is disabled by default, and it would be really great if we could get rid of RC4 also in the DCE-RPC protocols. Like it's used in backup key, LSA, SAMR, and netlog on, and Microsoft doesn't provide any alternative to that. And
Well,
it would
okay,
be great
yeah.
if this could be fixed, and also not define again a fixed cipher, but say here we have a structure where you can then select one of ciphers which can be extended in future.
Yeah, I think the way how it's done with negoX is a good approach to provide this kind of extension for new algorithms. If we could have methods that actually say not just on authentication, but on the internal use of algorithm, these crypto algorithms, that you can negotiate certain methods and not really be tied to RC4 forever, that would be great. Coming back, Tom, to your question, I think it's always a compromise at the customer side. They make a decision whether certain software is going to be used in the environment they have, or they can buy in some delay for their own compliance. In the governmental organizations, that's harder and harder to do. So it's no wonder that, for example, the governmental organizations are much more sitting on top of NFS, for example, and not really SMB protocol. But for
that's a big shame, and I think it's inevitable that this will become a hard requirement. So I think it's great that you're exploring this space and figuring out what will work and what won't. The more we can turn that kind of thing on, I think the better it will be for adoption in the future.
Yep, and this is really needing the protocol level discussion. So some of these things have to be done at multiple places, not just in Samba, and agreed all together. And we don't want to have another a disaster with single organization defining what the security properties of a particular protocol. So we really need the industry-wide agreement and discussion on this. As to what is now, like Evgeny is asking, don't enable FIPS in current installations. You can actually, with the work we did, you can actually run pretty decently with Active Directory. Almost everything there in the normal environment can be configured to use AES ciphers. There are some catches, but they are fixable, like the default ciphers for default communication between parent domain controller in the forest and the child domain controller in the child domain in the forest is using RC4. You have to explicitly enable AES. And if you had these domains structure in the forest created like several years ago or decade ago, chances are that you still have only RC4 there. And if Linux machines get enrolled and try to use AES only, you would get problems like not being able to negotiate common encryption type for TGT towards the user's domain within the forest. That's typical thing. There's a lot of stuff like that happening, and we've seen this in the customer cases. In many cases, it's just talk to the administrators and let them to switch couple switches and fix this. The question is how hard to fix Samba tooling to use PKU2U. I frankly don't know. If we assume that this is done as a part of the Espaniga and Kerberos negotiation, it's a matter of maybe advertising by the server, advertising by the client, and setting priorities what to choose. It needs an experiment. This really needs to be tried and seen there. With the questions about enrollment, like in Debian, the crypto set to all ciphers independent of what the comp account. This probably a bug that needs to just be fixed in NetIDEas. Please file this bug to Samba Bugzilla. Yeah.
So I have a question about using FIPS mode and just trying to move up. If we were to move to one of these new password exchange mechanisms, is it possible within the requirements of FIPS mode to still be based on the current password hash, so that we've got a way forward for existing installations that's relatively transparent? So can we start with the NT4 hash and
you
then
cannot.
Further?
You are not allowed to use
even as the first step, as which would just be equivalent to the original password.
You simply cannot use RC4.
No, not RC4, MD4.
MD4 is not allowed either.
So we can't use that as the first compression.
No.
So it's no problem to store MD4 in a local database. It's just that if you are sending this over the wire
yeah, well, that's that. Yeah. So what I mean, for example, NTLM v2 wraps an MD4 password in RC4 HMAC and other. No, sorry, HMAC MD5. Now let's assume MD5 was allowed. It's not. Would that be okay if we define up a new scheme? Can we upgrade from where we are without requiring everyone to restore passwords? Is what I'm sort of asking.
So
you treat the current passwords as if they were the plain text, then add hashing and hashing on top of that.
You need a new scheme anyway. So yes, you could do negoX extension that actually wraps in something that FIPS compatible, the older scheme, because that FIPS compatible wrapping will be enough to run in FIPS. an internal, like a plain text from the perspective of FIPS compatibility inside that wrapping can stay what it was, but it needs to be written. It's not a ready-made solution. Yeah,
sure. Just trying to figure a way possibly forward. I've asked Microsoft about NTLM v3 kind of ideas, and all I got back was, we're not really interested. We've gone to Windows Hello and everyone onto Azure. So we're not going to get direction from that end. We need to come up with something, and we need to come up with something that people can migrate to without going.
Let me answer one last question, because our time is over. At least it shows about the FIPS validation for all of these things. There's no going to be any validation of Samba for this, for FIPS, because we don't need to. The FIPS validation is done for the crypto libraries itself. And the use of those crypto libraries is verified when you do a claim for FIPS compliance in the product, but that part is not need to be validated. The FIPS validation itself is very expensive. It's done by the third-party library, and it's really rigorous and takes a lot of time. And it's typically only done to the crypto libraries, not applications that consume them.